What can I say? Scalpel. Can I say, now let's talk about how this slices up the trail? Hey everybody, I'm Mike Levy. We're back for another field test video. Now, if you've read a review before, you've probably seen somebody call a bike a scalpel. It's a cliched way of saying that it's made for a very specific purpose, usually fast, efficient cross-country riding. But the real scalpel? Well, it's been in Cannondale's lineup since way back in 2001 when it debuted as a, get this, fast, efficient bike made for cross-country racing. And here we are nearly 20 years later with the all-new Scalpel. Now, Cannondale has split the bike into two categories. Sarah Moore is riding the race bike with 100 millimeters of travel, but I'm on the SE. That gets an extra 20 millimeters, so it's 120 millimeters front and back, and includes things like a dropper post, a shorter stem, wider handlebar, and it comes stock with burlier tires. All right, let's zoom in on this all-new frame and see what Cannondale has created. So the American company has a long history of doing things differently. You know, from two-shock downhill bikes to single-sided forks, all sorts of interesting things, and it's made them very polarizing over the years. This new Scalpel is probably one of their more conventional designs, but it's still not exactly a cookie-cutter bike. Let's look at the rear suspension first. It has 120 millimeters of travel, and it uses a Horst link-ish pivot. Now what Cannondale is doing is you're using engineered flex. Again, this isn't anything new, and Cannondale has actually used this way back since the first Scalpel. To mimic the action of a Horst link suspension design, this flat section of carbon near the axle, well, it flexes, but it doesn't flex along the whole length. There's a very specific point right in the middle where Cannondale has engineered this flex to happen. Since we're talking about the chain stays, have a look at these things. Huge, tall box section stays should add some torsional rigidity, as should the captive pivot in the seat tube. Okay, let's move on to some details. None of us want to wear backpacks or wear jerseys with big pockets anymore, and most of us, except for a few people in Europe and probably me, think they're too cool for seat bags. So Cannondale had to come up with another way for people to carry stuff, and this is how they've done it. Underneath the bottle cage mount is a slot where you can push in a fabric tool. When you want to get it out, you pull this little rubber tab. On the other side, there's a Dynaplug tool. If you ever wreck your tire, you can just push it in and fix that. And there's a spot that holds a CO2. Cannondale includes a blanking plate, so you can put that in there and then put your bottle cage right over top. And speaking of bottles, like any good cross-country bike, you can fit two bottles inside the front triangle, one on the down tube and one on the seat tube. Another thing to mention is Cannondale's AI design, asymmetrical integration. And what they're doing is they're offsetting the rear wheel by 6 millimeters to create more tire clearance and, they say, a stiffer rear end. Geometry next. Now, as you'd expect, my SE Scalpel is slacker than Sarah's racy Scalpel. This is 67 degrees. Reach for my large size test bike is 450 millimeters. Seat tube, 74 degrees. Now, one number that I do want to point out is the seat tube length, which measures 480 millimeters. That's the longest here, and it means that you're not going to be able to put a long travel dropper post on this bike. Let's talk models and pricing. There are two versions of the SE as well as a women's model, and it all starts at the $4,000 SE2. Now, that money gets you SRAM's SX12 speed drivetrain and RockShox's SID Select fork. All right, if you've got more money to spend, this is the SE1 that costs $5,500 American. Now that's gonna get you a SID Select Plus fork, SID Lux shock, an XT drivetrain, and Cannondale's own hologram aluminum cranks that are actually pretty light. It also includes their hologram carbon fiber wheels. This bike, as you see it, weighs 25.2 pounds, and that's with our Schwalbe control tires, without pedals, and without the fabric tool that the bike comes with. Cannondale says that a frame and shock, they come in right around 1,900 grams. Okay, so now that we've got through all that stuff, it's finally time to talk about how the Scalpel performs.
We're gonna gonna get into how it climbs and descends in just a minute here, but first, anything special with setup?
Not so much. Same as the other bike. So we put our Schwalbe tires on there. Cannondale has decals on the bike that tell you suspension pressures for your weight, which is super handy. Everybody should do that. So we used manufacturer suggested settings and hit the trails. As simple as that.
We started with a climb.
Right.
How did it climb?
When you're faced with those weird, awkward sections where you're like, you don't even know where to go, this bike takes you through them. Technical climbing, I think the bike's length, it's shorter, it's a little steeper. It just seemed to crawl up this stuff. And we're gonna talk about suspension later, but I think much like you mentioned that your racy Cannondale felt nice and supple off the top, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
The SE, 120 millimeters of travel, definitely felt more forgiving than the other 120 millimeter bikes here. That helps so much in that technical slow speed jumbles, and especially when it's wet and slippery like she was saying.
So it feels a little bit more like a race bike than a trail bike?
I wouldn't say that actually.
No.
It has a somewhat upright position. The reach is 450 millimeters for a large, so
30 millimeters less than that transition spur.
So the bike is shorter and the suspension is active and forgiving. It lets the rear end track the ground. Great handling in that slow speed stuff, and this thing, it just dominated technical climbs. Yeah, so we're gonna touch on the geometry again, right off the bat with the descending. The C-tube length is 480 millimeters. So you don't have a lot of room for a dropper post on this bike. I mean, it comes with a dropper post. It doesn't have as much travel as the other bikes. And
mine came with a rigid post, so you know,
it could be worse.
You count yourself lucky, right?
Yeah, I guess it could be worse. This SE model, they use the same frame as Sarah's racy bike. So personally, I would like to see a way shorter seat tube. I think if you're making a bike, short travel bike, to be a little bit more capable, you're gonna want a longer travel dropper post on it. And the only way they could do that is make a shorter seat tube, which means not using the same frame as your cross-country race bike.
So a bit of a downfall there on the long seat tube, and is there anything else on that holds it back on the descents?
Well, I didn't really gel with the geometry, to be honest. I felt high and compact, you know? I never felt like I was in the bike. I felt like I was always over the bike. So especially when traction wasn't all that good, it hasn't been. It's been raining the whole time.
Been a little wet, yeah, a little slick.
Yeah. So in those moments where you're coming into the corner and you need to let the bike move around under you, it always felt like the bike was like gonna do that.
It was working on its own. It wasn't working with you.
It was doing its own thing. Where some of the other bikes, yeah, sure, they're moving too, but I always felt like they were gonna catch themselves. And
so it's not as predictable.
It didn't feel as predictable. It didn't feel as stable, especially at higher speeds. And I never felt as comfortable on it. Now, having said that, when you get into some terrain that isn't pointing down, when you're into, rolling stuff where you need to carry a lot of speed, yeah, I mean, there you go. It pedals well, it's comfortable, so you could stay in the seat and just keep turning the pedals over and handles quickly. So not all that well suited to just going as fast as you can.
Right, so kind of like you have a certain degree where you won't want to take this bike anymore, not too steep of a downhill, kind of more flat terrain and a little bit less steep.
I think it actually comes down to speed more than anything, to be honest with you. I did ride some fairly steep things on the Scalpel SE, and they were all things, though, where you roll into them slowly. Your entry speed is fairly slow. But as soon as I started going fast, it just felt like the bike, it wasn't as composed, Let's just put it that way. So overall, on the descents, the Scalpel is definitely far more capable than you would think a cross-country bike would ever be. But it doesn't have that sort of new school, let's go fast sort of vibe to it. Think capable cross country.
Then we put it to the clock. How did it fare there in the time lapse?
Second overall, and it made up all that time on the climb, of course. It was 5th out of 5 bikes on the descent, and that's kind of what it felt like, to be honest.
Kind of what you would expect from what you just told us in the climbing and descending portion.
Exactly, it's exactly what I would expect.
And what about on the efficiency test? How did it do there?
Yeah, actually, the efficiency test too, it was right in there with all the other bikes. It was actually on the same second as your racy Cannondale.
Bike, the fast one.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be faster.
It is, yeah. So it did pretty well there, and that's no surprise. It feels relatively efficient too. So.
What if we take a look at the components? What stands out to you there?
There's a couple things we're going to talk about. First off, I'd like to see a nicer stem and a wider handlebar. I do want to shout out the hologram cranks. These are Cannondale's hollow aluminum cranks. They're very
look pretty
nice.
cool.
Yeah, they're very nice and very light. I know they're not a SRAM or Raceface or Shimano or whatever, but they are very nice and very light. So,
What about the wheels?
Well-
Do you have a story there?
oh, do I ever? Yeah. So the bike comes with Cannondale's hologram carbon fiber rims. They're super light. I think they're under 400 grams or something like that. I did break one.
You broke a wheel. I was there. It was pretty exciting.
Yeah, so here's the story. It was during filming. We were coming down, and I didn't take a great line choice.
You
know,
I mean,
to be
you know,
fair.
sometimes Mike Levy
Every
might
now
not
and then,
taste the best
every now
line.
and then, I don't take a great line. And I had 23 PSI in the tire. I'm 153 pounds or so. And I hadn't been burping any tires or feeling anything roll over, but rock strike, cracked a rim, cut a tire. So we talked to Cannondale. They said, we're glad to see Mike enjoying the new Scalpel SE and putting its capability to the test. We agree with Mike that the combination of tire pressure, rowdiness, and an untimely rock strike exceeded the durability of the rim, which is considerable. While this is not technically covered under our warranty, we evaluate each situation, and in this case, the wheel would be replaced to get the rider back on the trail as quickly as possible. So there you go. It sounds like if that happened to you, Cannondale's going to look after you. They get you a new rim and get you rolling. So.
Let's get into the pros and the cons, starting with the good stuff.
I mean, the first thing is this bike is an amazing technical climber. It just crawls up that kind of stuff. The other big plus, the forgiving suspension. It's all-day comfort, and that means all-day speed. So if you have rougher terrain, or you like to do stage racing, or just huge rides, like
Longer days.
Yeah, you like to get way out there, but you want to be on a capable cross-country bike, the SE is a good option.
What about some of the cons?
Well, I did break that wheel.
Yep.
So there's the broken wheel, and then obviously the other thing, I didn't really gel with this bike's geometry, especially the C-tube. I think Cannondale needs to update this thing. I know it's brand new, but like it should have a shorter C-tube and maybe a longer reach.
What's your final verdict on this bike, and who do you think would be the right person to buy it?
Yeah, I think the SE probably suits a traditional cross-country rider, but maybe that person is sick and tired of getting thrown over the handlebars anytime they want to have fun on their old cross-country bike. They can get on something like this, they can do huge rides, they can be comfortable. It is far more capable than a cross-country bike from even a year or two ago. At the same time, I mean, this isn't the bike to send it on, so if you like to ride a short travel bike with all your enduro buddies, this isn't it really. Yeah, but...
Choose another one for that.
Yeah, exactly, but typical cross-country, Scalpel SE, a solid option.
There you have it. That's the Cannondale Scalpel SE. Stay tuned for more videos from the cross-country field test, as well as a roundtable where we compare all of these bikes.
Plenty of arguing still to come, I think.
Definitely.
All right.